century. This is a highly strategic statement that I think we must take a minute to internalize. You see, since the ascendancy of the United States, and for about what, 200, 300, about 2 or 3 centuries prior to that, it has been the Atlantic century. During this period, the world saw transformation of socio-political systems, legal codes, commercial activities, and technological growth, almost all of them arising from the North Atlantic nations. We, the Pacific people, except for Japan, became observers and followers. India and China, major Asian economic powers, prior to that, along with many other Pacific states, were reduced to colonies of the North Atlantic nations. In the 20th century, the Pacific states found themselves free from colonial rule but remained followers in all other aspects, again with the exception of Japan. China and India were still caught in internal struggles to become organized and economically effective. Only towards the end of the last decade of the last century did these two nations stir to reach out to their true potential. But when they did stir, what an economic revolution that was and still is. Their latent strength is visible to all now. In Asia, China and India are growing at breakneck speed. These countries, with Brazil and Russia in the quartet, make up the BRIC economies, a term coined about 10 years ago by Goldman Sachs rock star Jim O'Neill. Both China and India are major consumer markets. Their population base are increasingly discerning, affluent, educated, with growing purchasing power, upwardly mobile, and with a growing appetite for a better life. The potential of these two nations is tremendous. Now, while large populations were previously seen as an obstacle to development, driven by socio-political reforms and enlightened economic policies that have lifted millions out of poverty, these two countries are now viewed as engines of world economic growth. The focus on them is in fact sharper now as the economic engines of the United States and Europe are sputtering. Let us first look at China, the world's third largest economy. I think Eurozone is still there. I'm not sure Eurozone 17 or Eurozone 27, but it's still number 2. China, with its ancient civilization, rich heritage, solid work ethic, low wages, and now with its growing economic and financial might, is a country that no one can ignore. While the West may have finally realized China's potential, Malaysia, as you may recall, was the first nation in ASEAN to establish diplomatic ties with China in 1974 by the then Prime Minister Tun Abdul Razak Hussein. Now this decision, which given the economic powerhouse that China is today, shows a considerable amount of foresight on the part of Malaysia. But it was also a decision that made China a friend, not an adversary, a colleague, not a competitor, a partner, not a rival. The bilateral ties between our two countries have been strengthened, widened, and deepened over the years. China is not standing still. It is aggressively expanding its influence abroad with investments in Africa, Latin America, Europe, and in Asia as well. It is opening up its borders to foreign investments, as well as sending an increasing number of its youth to study at top universities in the United States and in Europe. An increasing number of Chinese youth are learning English, and more businessmen in the West are beginning to learn Mandarin. Even us, we're all trying to speak Mandarin. The whole of Singapore speaks Mandarin to facilitate the business expansion in China. The population of the Chinese diaspora, those who have left their home to settle in other nations, is estimated to be about 40 million. Amongst these, Secretary of Energy Stephen Chu is one of the several overseas Chinese, what was the term? I think Hua Chiao, who have won the Nobel Prize in the science and humanities field. In business, the Chinese diaspora has done very, very well, and you've got names like Jerry Yang of Yahoo, Huang Chen-su, who co-founded NVIDIA, and of course, Stephen Chen, YouTube, and then the CEO of Avon, a lady, is Andrea Jung. Internationally, Chinese companies have done very, very well, with many dominating the top brand sports. Some of the top brands are Haier, Huawei, and Lenovo. I'm only naming 3. And we all know how prevalent the products and services provided by these companies are. Now, India, a democracy as opposed to a centrally planned China, India is no less attractive. Its IT savvy, highly educated, skilled labor force has enabled Silicon Valley to make headway. Many Indian IT personnel have returned home to help India achieve higher growth. The developments, growth and progress of many cities, including and especially Bangalore, have fired the imagination of not just the Indian nationals working abroad, but the foreigners as well. While many countries have discovered India only, about 10, 15 years ago, once again, good old Malaysia. We established diplomatic ties with New Delhi in 1957, the year that we got our independence. Today, with the visit of Prime Minister Najib Tun Razak, the relationship is multifaceted and continues to grow. The 25 million strong Indian diaspora has spread out from their home to become productive citizens and residents of the United States, Europe, Africa, and many countries in Asia, and including Malaysia. In the field of business management, India has outstanding talents, such as, you know, everyone that I'm going to mention to you. Indra Nooyi, Chairman and CEO of PepsiCo, Vikram Pandit, Chairman and CEO of Citigroup, Sanjay Jha, Co-CEO of Motorola, and Ajay Banga, President and CEO of MasterCard. Just to name 4, in the millions of Indians working all over multinational corporations. In the field of sciences and humanities, again, impressive list, personalities of Indian origin such as V. Ramakrishnan, Amartya Sen, V.S. Naipaul have all won Nobel Prizes. And not forgetting my very good friend in New York, Farid Zakaria, Time International editor and CNN anchor. His brother was number 2 in Merrill Lynch, and they both come from Mumbai. Indian corporations have also made successful ventures overseas. Tata Motors now owns Jaguar and Land Rover in the UK. 80% of revenues from Tata Consultancy Services, another Tata subsidiary, come from outside India. How do I know this? I sit on the board of a bank in Malaysia, and Tata is doing a lot of work for us. Ranbaxy, and you know this, is the 9th largest generics pharmaceutical company in the world. Dr. Reddy's is the first Asia-Pacific pharmaceutical company outside of Japan to list on the New York Stock Exchange in the year 2001. Auto components company Bharat Forge is now the world's 2nd largest forgings maker. And I think their chassis component, if I'm not mistaken, is still the world's leading manufacturer. Infosys has 30 marketing offices across the world, 26 global software development centers in the United States, Canada, Australia, UK, Japan, and ladies and gentlemen, I can go on and on about China and India. Now, I have quite a number of you in this room. While India and China are viewed as a new Asian frontiers and rightly attract attention, if I may, I'd like to speak about, very briefly, about a third frontier, Indonesia. The world's 3rd largest democracy, population of 237 million people, 17,000 islands, 3 time zones, 642 dialects, and is fast emerging as a global economic player. Once again, Jim O'Neill, his latest label is Growth Markets. This covers the BRIC Quartet, Mexico, Turkey, and guess what? Indonesia. Since 1998, and despite volatility around much of the world, Indonesia's economy has held up. 70% of its GDP is based on its domestic economy. 40 of the richest Indonesian in Forbes magazine about 2 weeks ago, they all have a net worth of USD 85.1 billion. And if you take the top 10% of the Indonesian population and look at it from whatever angle, economic, intellectual, social angles, you would find the number almost equals the entire Malaysian population. Such is the potential of Indonesia. We cannot and must not ignore the importance of this emerging nation, a member of the G20, with which we have much in common, language, religion, culture, food, and many of us have relatives in Indonesia and can trace our roots back to the country. There's a term that is still being used, that we still use actually, referring to our 2 peoples, satu rumpun, one cluster, one group. Now, ladies and gentlemen, these 3 nations, India, China, and Indonesia, are busy implementing a formula that had made Europe and North America successful. They're investing in infrastructure, they are improving their legal and governance processes, investing in research and development, and freeing movement of international ideas and talent. And most critically, very importantly, they are investing in world-class education. In China, Peking University, Tsinghua University, and the University of Science and Technology are among 20 or so universities that are steadily climbing global university league tables ranking. In India, the 16 Indian Institutes of Technology and 13 Indian Institutes of Management are renowned globally as being best in class. I'm sure Indonesia will soon follow suit by upgrading its educational institutions, and I know it has already begun. China, India, and Indonesia combined have a population of 2.75 billion out of the global 7 billion. I will not ask you to be awed by the size of the population. It would be meaningless number if not for the fact that the three countries are doubling their GDP every 8 to 10 years. Now, that's a figure that has a wow factor. Anyone who knows how to read an exponential graph would understand what I'm trying to say. Let me provide you with some statistics. Using purchasing power parity, China's GDP is USD 10.09 trillion, India is 4.06 trillion, and Indonesia is 1.1 trillion. These numbers, as I said earlier, are doubling every 8 to 10 years. By any account, these are impressive figures which no right-thinking businessman, investor, entrepreneur, and analyst can afford to ignore. Ladies and gentlemen, let us, however, be a realist and ask the very pertinent question, so what? So what if these nations are growing fast? How does that help us? Surprisingly, the answer is simple and easy to visualize. Think of the last time when the geographic regions, now known as China and India, were leading powers. And now think about what was the role and position at that time of a geographic region now known as Malaysia. Think back to the times when we had Malacca and Penang as leading trading posts. You have the answer. We, sandwiched between these three nations, can once again play a pivotal role in their and our economic success. But it gets better. I dare say that if you look around in this room, you will find that special ingredient that will drive our success. It is our multicultural environment. Malaysia is the only nation that, in the real sense of the word, can lay claim to being able to understand and work across Asian cultures, languages, and other social nuances. We cannot but succeed if we put our minds together and apply discipline of action in our planning and implementation. Now, how can all this contribute to your own success? My message this morning is twofold. First, know what position of strength you occupy. I have already elaborated on this. Second, ask yourself, how are you going to leverage this strength? I say that you must travel. I say that you must discover, and I say that you must learn. You should see and experience people and places in China, in India, and even in Indonesia. Remember, it was Marco Polo's travels that first brought knowledge from China to the West. It was an interpret Portuguese whose travels brought knowledge and commerce to Europe from Asia. We cannot do anything if we were to remain in our comfortable homes, being contented with cyber travel through web browsing. I urge you to learn the languages of these nations. Find that interesting job in Delhi, in Beijing, and in Jakarta, and grab the opportunity to learn. Don't worry about pay and money. Wealth of experience and knowledge precedes financial wealth. More importantly, recall that I spoke about the value of building networks in the new frontier at the beginning of my speech. As you accumulate new knowledge and experience, actively, and I mean this, actively seek out to build effective personal and business networks wherever you go. This will serve you in good stead in years to come. Time and effort invested in building a network of local, regional, and international friends and associates will be rewarded in many multiples as your career and professional eminence develops. Now, before I conclude, let me give you some brief, and I mean very, very brief, personal examples. The Kuala Lumpur Business Club, the KLBC, have made business visits to the United States, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, the Philippines, and the United Arab Emirates. We are non-governmental. Every single visit was made through sheer, pure, unadulterated networking. Let me start with the United States very quickly. We've been to New York once, we've been to New York and Washington again. One was on the back of the Prime Minister's visit. Basically, the leadership got together, and I'm doing this off the cuff, by the way. The leadership got together and decided, who do we know? And lo and behold, we discovered that, impeccable networking in the Kuala Lumpur Business Club. 25 years ago, I went to a conference and got to know Timothy Geithner. He's now Secretary of the Treasury. And we've kept in touch. Whenever the Americans come out to Malaysia, I get to know them. I would host them, and do all kinds of stuff, entertain them, put them in front of people, important people in Malaysia, unimportant people in Malaysia as well. So when we wrote to him and say, Tim, can you host us? Then he was president of the New York Federal Reserve Bank. Absolutely. We trooped in, we saw the bank, we went down 64 floors and saw the entire vault. We even carried gold bars. It was totally amazing. And he knew